Hi everyone, I wanted to share with you some stories of my journey of being a documentary filmmaker, particularly the mistakes, the struggles, and the failures. It feels right to say at the beginning of this talk that I feel so fortunate to be a part of such an incredible community that has supported me from the beginning of my career. For some reason, documentary filmmaking attracts such passionate, energetic, resilient people. And so many of them find time to share themselves and their expertise with other filmmakers. I will always be astounded and filled with gratitude for this. Before I even began my career, when I came to the US in 2011, I had no idea what a documentary was or what my future would be. I was 26 years old. And all I knew was that I wanted to become a journalist so I could report on the injustice I witnessed in China. I went to Ohio University with a scholarship, majoring in media studies. It was a graduate program focused on media theory. I asked a freshman teacher if I could sit in her video production one-on-one class. In the first class, she played a video and asked the students to raise their hands when they saw a cut. Every few seconds, the entire class would raise their hands. And I was lost and confused. I didn't know what they were seeing on the screen that I didn't see. Nothing seemed wrong. I didn't know what a cut was. That was 2011. It was then that I took a documentary class and saw documentaries for the first time. I was amazed by how compelling and impactful documentaries could be. So I decided that it was something that I wanted to do. I then applied to a documentary program at NYU's journalism school. The program was a year and a half long, and we needed to make a 30-minute thesis documentary for graduation. During the summer of the first year, I went back to China to film. That film eventually would become Hooligan Sparrow, my first feature. But it took a long time. When I graduated, I had a rough cut of the film, but I had no idea what the next steps should be and how to make the film seen by an audience. A professor asked if I had thought about applying for post-production grants. I said no. I didn't know that post-production grants existed. He said, "Have you heard of Sundance?" And I said, "No." "What is Sundance?" He said, "I'm going to write it down and you can Google it when you get home." That night, I went online and I was amazed to find out that there were grants for finishing a film, and those applications were free. I started making a list of all the grants that I could find on Google and applied to each one of them. I had no idea how to write a budget. One of the grants that I applied for was from ITVS, which offered up to $250,000 to finish a film. I tried my best to come up with numbers. Color correction for $500, sound mixing for $500. My total budget for the film ended up being $46,000. I didn't know how much things would cost, and it never occurred to me that I should have a salary too. I shot, edited, transcribed, subtitled. I did everything myself. And then I got rejected by every grant I applied for. In the meantime, I had to pay the bills. As an immigrant, I struggled to find a job. Most of my job applications never got a response. Very few employers wanted to sponsor the visa. When I finally got an interview for a job editing a fundraising sample, the producer told me, "You know, all our interviews are in English, and we're concerned that you won't be able to understand the dialogue." This was a low point for me, for my career certainly, but also for my sense of self. It didn't seem to matter how effectively I demonstrated to people how capable I was. They saw me, how I looked, and how I sounded, and reacted with skepticism. And this wasn't even the end of the rejections. Shortly after, I applied for a job taking attendance at an after-school program, which paid $8 an hour. I was rejected for that too. In the 3 months after I graduated from NYU, I made $340 total. All this time, I kept revising Hooligan Sparrow, editing on the computer in my apartment, hoping that one day someone would see the film. A steady stream of rejected grant applications kept coming in. It never stopped being hard, and the stress and uncertainty were relentless. But I kept revising the film, kept applying for grants, kept believing that the story I was telling was important and would find its way out into the world. In 2014, I paid $140 to attend an industry event called Meeting the Decision Makers. It was a lot of money to me, but I thought maybe I could meet the funders face to face and tell them about the film in person. And maybe then they would be interested. I printed out my proposal and put the rough cut of the film on DVDs. There was one funder at each round table and 10 filmmakers eager to pitch their projects. I didn't know how to pitch. The concept of pitching wasn't part of my background or my culture. When the event was over, I mustered courage and asked some of the funders if they'd want to take my proposal and the DVDs there. They said no. I remember standing outside of the building with a full bag of proposal and DVDs thinking, should I throw them into the trash? By 2015, I was working 2 part-time jobs during the day, and I kept revising the film at night and during the weekends. I reapplied to some of the grants that rejected me. Then suddenly, Sundance called. They were awarding my film a post-production grant. It still feels like a miracle that they chose my film. I had no resume. There was no other experienced members on my team, and I had not made anything before. I was grateful that they even read my application at all, let alone awarded it a grant. What I do know is that if I had given up after the first time they rejected my film, and after all of the other rejections, it's likely that my film never would have been finished, and I wouldn't be talking to you here today. Making a documentary is hard. Inevitably, there will be moments of self-doubt, desperation, disappointment, and fear. When I was on the verge of giving up, I remembered the people in the film who trusted me with their time and stories. I remembered what I had seen in China while making the film. Every time I looked through my footage, I saw the faces of activists who still were struggling to fight something so much more powerful than themselves. I remembered why I chose documentary filmmaking. I knew that I wanted the film to make a difference, and I knew that somehow I had to keep trying. My first film, Hooligan Sparrow, ended up premiering at Sundance in 2016. It was touching to see how strongly people responded to the film. They cried in theaters. They wrote me in emails asking how they could help. Many of the activists in my film were still in prison at the time. I was hopeful that if the film gained enough exposure, the Chinese government would have to release the imprisoned activists. If I ever imagined what success for a documentary was, that must have been the first moment where I thought the film was successful. The film premiered at a top festival. People were seeing it, and now all I had to do was sit back and watch it change the world. The film did receive a lot of media coverage and generated a wide discussion among international human rights organizations. But the Chinese government didn't release the activists. Instead, they threatened my family, telling them to warn me not to speak about China's human rights in media interviews. Several months went by after my film came out, and nothing changed for the people in the film. I began to feel disappointed and started to question whether films were capable of inspiring the kind of change I imagined. As I attended more and more screenings, I met with audiences from all over the world. Every now and then, there would be a Chinese person in the screening, a student who studied abroad, or someone who worked overseas. They came up crying to me, saying that the film changed the way they saw the country. A young Chinese guy came up to me and said that he would never see China the same way he did after seeing the film. I knew how he felt. It happened to me when I was making the film. It transformed the way I saw China. I've realized that that's the power of film too. It allows people to see other people and places in a new way. One of the realizations that came to me after making my first documentary is that films are capable of creating change, but it probably will be much more gradual than we might want. And it will happen in ways that we don't expect. It won't be like flipping a switch. It's more like planting a seed. After finishing Hooligan Sparrow and premiering at Sundance, I assumed that my career was officially launched and that my days of rejection and uncertainty were over. I thought that each new film would be easier to make. Of course, I was wrong. I had by this time also started post-production on my second film, which I had actually begun filming before Hooligan Sparrow, but had put on hold. I was looking for money to finish the film. And while my first film's success did make it easier to approach funders for conversations, my second film also was met with one rejection after another. But this time, the film never got any funding at all. I ended up finishing it on my own time with my own money. Luckily, the film was accepted at South by Southwest and found distribution after the festival. This allowed for some of the deferred salary to be paid, but my illusions about an easy road after the success of my first film were shattered. In retrospect, it wasn't massively surprising that my second film didn't attract funding. It was an essayistic film about a young homeless guy that I met in Florida whose outlook and life experience captivated me. But it didn't captivate the funders, who didn't see the commercial potential for that kind of film. They also probably saw it as a departure from my first film. If I had been making another story about shocking human rights abuses in China, I may have had better luck finding money for my second project. It was only through commitment to my desire to finish the film that it ended up getting made. As I've progressed in my career since then, I've found myself facing the same challenge over and over. How can I make the film that I want, that I feel passionate about, while also making a living? I've been fortunate enough to have found a mostly steady stream of support for my project since then. But even now, I still find myself struggling to overcome a lot of doubt when I try to get a new project off the ground. To some extent, it's my own doubt, but also is often the doubts of others. Doubts about the viability of my ideas, doubts about what kind of stories will succeed out in the world. Aside from the challenges of getting each new project off the ground, a big surprise of my filmmaking career has been that each film's struggle doesn't end after its premiere. A few months after Hooligan Sparrow premiered at Sundance, I was fortunate that the film was required by POV for North American broadcast rights and licensed by Netflix for the North American streaming rights. I thought to myself, great, the film will get out into the world and people will see it. Then people around me who wanted to support me and the film and who understood the industry suggested that I should try to qualify the film for some awards, including the Academy Awards. The thinking was, it was one thing for the film to be broadcast on streaming platforms, but what did that matter if no one knew it was out there to be seen? Awards are the best way for a film to gain visibility, but I had no idea how awards worked and what qualification meant and how to go about it. I learned that to be submitted for consideration for an Academy Award, a film must be screened for a minimum of 1 week in both New York City and LA. My distribution deals didn't include any theatrical screenings. The film wouldn't make any money in theaters. I found myself asking, how much does it cost to rent the theaters in New York City and LA? How do I go about running ads, promoting it on social media, and eventually submitting it for the award? I also needed to figure out the partners and the team, who could help do what, who could help handle the theatrical booking, and how much do they charge? Where can I find publicists who can help pitch the film to journalists and get the reviews, and how much do they charge? Do I need a social media manager? What about an impact producer? On top of all of these questions, I had to figure out how to raise money to cover all of the costs. This was all for a film that I had considered already made, already done. But now it felt like I was producing the film's sequel. In the meantime, I was trying to figure out how I could continue working on my second film. Each question felt more daunting than the one before. Each question required a decisive and quick decision, or I'd be missing the window to give the film a potential big boost with an award that could raise its profile and give it to a broader audience. It was the last thing I wanted to do. I suppose the work of promoting the film is its own type of creativity, but to me, it felt almost like I was back writing grants for the film again. It filled me with the same apprehension and uncertainty. But the people who encouraged me moved me. When a philanthropist named Linda Wyman decided to donate money for the post-production of my film, she asked how much money I need and wrote me a check more than what I asked for. And she said, if you don't use it up, save it for your next film. When I was debating whether to do the theatrical release of the film myself, Jin Chan, the fairy godmother of documentary filmmaking, who overwhelmed me with her enthusiasm for me and my work, and who donated money to a physical sponsorship I set up at IDA for the making of the film before I had even decided to do the theatrical release of the film. I thought I couldn't even find a way to return her donation. On top of this, I was already making my second film, and an editor I was working with told me that he was willing to work on my second film with a deferred salary if I needed to prioritize the awards campaign and spend the money on Hooligan Sparrow instead. It was gestures like this that eventually motivated me to go ahead and engage with the awards process. It is unimaginable to look back now and see how we did it. The Academy required the submission of 300 physical DVDs to its voters in 2016. Distributors and other same people typically hire services with sufficient scale to design and produce the professional quality of DVDs that made an impression with voters. I bought 300 blank DVDs from Amazon and 300 blank printable labels. Then I snuck into a computer room at NYU and spent a full day there making DVDs on 20 different computers in the room, sliding them into sleeves and then affixing them with plain text stickers with the film's runtime and title. When we finally arranged the film's theatrical release, we had a Q&As where the people on the stage outnumbered the people in the audience. I was grateful for the support of my team and the few people who attended the screenings. But I found the awards campaign to be draining, mainly because it kept me away from working on my second film. Miraculously, Hooligan Sparrow ended up being shortlisted for an Academy Award. I was surprised and grateful. Every form of recognition of the film received compounded and added to my sense of encouragement. The film was being seen. But I did find myself wondering if that recognition or any recognition was worth whatever benefit it bestowed, especially in light of the extra commitment in time and money it required. 2 of my most recent films have also gone through the awards qualification process. One Chow Nation and In the Same Breath both had amazing support from its distributors, Amazon and HBO. I didn't have to print the 300 DVDs myself anymore. It was a huge privilege to have an entire team's support in getting the film seen. But again, there was the time. Following the year of One Child Nation being released, I spent 1/3 of the year traveling away from my family. And also that year, I didn't make a new film. The experience crystallized for me the reality that you have to make a film twice. Once actually making it, and then again pushing it out into the world. It feels a bit ingracious saying it out loud, but in the spirit of disclosure and honesty, I have to say that the second making of each film has made me feel like that something in our industry isn't working. There's no industry in the world where marketing and promotion aren't important. If nobody knows your film exists, nobody would see it. But a peculiarity of our industry is that so much of what makes a project visible is how many awards it wins. Conventional wisdom holds that the best and most worthwhile projects rise to the top and achieve the most accolades. To some extent, it is true. But it's at least as true that winning awards correlates strongly with having a lot of money and resources to spend on promoting a film. And so the awards themselves become less an acknowledgement of the best submission than they are a return on the investment in a well-funded awards campaign. I've spoken to many filmmakers who've been on this journey and shared similar feelings. Basically, every filmmaker I know remembers acutely how precious and scarce every dollar of funding was at the beginning of our careers. And many of us still have to expend as much energy fighting for the funds to get our films made as we do actually making the film. And so it's painful to see so much money and energy spent on elaborate events and campaigns for awards when so many worthwhile projects never get off the ground because of a lack of resources. I think I speak for many filmmakers when I say that if we could really choose, we wouldn't spend any time campaigning for awards. We're filmmakers, we wanted to make films. But the way that our industry is configured means that we need to make compromises in order for the film to gain the exposure that we hoped for. I often wake up and feel amazed and grateful that I actually get to do what I love for a living. It wouldn't have happened without the support of the community and the trust of the people who have helped get my films funded and made. But each time, as soon as one project is over, I'm back to wondering, am I going to fight to realize my vision for the work again? Am I going to be able to be strong enough to say no to any compromises? Can I afford to follow my heart? Can I afford to keep my artistic integrity? I've been tremendously lucky so far in that I've worked on stories that I myself found, chose to work on, and felt passionate about. With those projects, I didn't really need to take time to debate with myself whether or not it would work as a film. The circumstances compelled me to pick up the camera and start recording, and figure out everything else later. Across these projects, the subject matter has varied, but the consistent factor has been my passion for each story. Of course, I always dealt with doubt and uncertainty. But because it was my own choice to fall in love with each project in the first place, there was enough passion and commitment to get through it. In the last 2 years, something has started happening that was unimaginable to me back in 2014 when I was rejected for the attendance-taking job. People have started to reach out to me to direct projects. Of course, I'm grateful for the opportunities, but it's a new kind of challenge. And I've taken the following approach. Did I feel passionate enough to explore the subject matter? Is it socially and historically significant and meaningful enough that I would want the project to exist in our world now and for years to come? Is it going to challenge my own creativity and allow me to grow professionally and personally? Who will be the partners that I'll be working with? Are they going to be supportive, and how much creative freedom I get to have? I know that there are situations that I don't want to be in. I do not want to be emotionally drained because of power struggles and the lack of creative control. I do not want to stylistically repeat my previous work and have little growth or innovation. And I do not want to commit to topics that I'm only half interested in, that are not worth 1 year or 2 of my life. People often refer to right now as the golden age of documentary filmmaking. They might mean that there is more acquisition, more docs being made, more funding available for documentaries. But there is also a new business model. Companies who would invest in the development, partner with directors, creating a pitch deck or sizzle reel, and together they pitch to distributors. If a project gets greenlit, the company gets their funding back and makes profit, the projects get made. Compared to independent projects, it reduces the risks that individual directors take personally and financially to have to get a project off the ground. But what are the directors sacrificing in return? While on the one hand, the risks were reduced from the early stage when the project was starting. On the other hand, filmmakers risk giving up creative freedom. Creative control means being able to make the project the way you envisioned or not, and it is affected by every decision along the way, from how you want to shoot and edit and whom you want to shoot and edit with. Each decision could affect the direction of the project is going. Even seemingly unrelated business decisions, such as how the budget is spent on line items, affected creative decision-making. It is a struggle that I hear about from many filmmakers, whether to completely follow your heart and be truly independent and free, or to negotiate and compromise in exchange for security and opportunity. It's a struggle that many people face who make a living with their creativity. It feels paradoxical to hear this moment being described as a golden age when so many filmmakers I know feel overwhelmed by the struggle. I might have made documentary filmmaking sound really hard, but that mostly does reflect reality. We take physical risks, creative risks, and financial risks in order to tell the stories that we want people to hear. Sometimes it seems a little crazy that anyone would choose this career. But when I talk to other filmmakers, whether they are making their first film or their 10th film, with full crews and budgets or with just their own money and skills, I realize that we all have this in common. We're all a little crazy. We're all so passionate about storytelling that we're willing to take these risks. And we're all crazy enough that we would go through this insane process of making a film and then repeat the process over and over. Our industry is filled by passion and a willingness to take risks. That said, the strength of the independent film community and its shared sense of purpose helps filmmakers take their stories to places that they themselves couldn't have taken on their own. Ultimately, I've found that in filmmaking, the struggles do not end. They evolve. Throughout my career, I've seen the value of sharing our struggles and talking through them out loud with each other. My hope is that the kind of struggles I've talked about today will be topics that everyone in our industry feels comfortable discussing openly. Every time I've felt lost or discouraged in my work, I've always found support from this community. And in the end, it's the community and its shared sense of purpose that help us find inspiration, clarity, and the strength to persevere. Thank you.